Hey, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the post NFL Week 2 podcast here by myself today. No special guests. If you notice, no Jason Voorhees over my shoulder. No special guests today. I've got nothing scripted for today, so this is going to be completely on the fly. Nothing in my hands, nothing on my screen here. Basically, just talking about football and what has happened in Week 2. Special homage today, I guess. To all of my Minnesota peeps. I've got my Golden Gophers hat, my new Prague, Minnesota football shirt on. So basically what we are going to do today, we're going to take a little bit of a Colin Cowherd type of approach to this, where he's just really serious and he's talking into the microphone and going over some stuff. And the first topic I think we all need to talk about here, and what we need to address, and what the NFL needs to address as a whole, is the Tua Tagovailoa situation here with the concussions. Now, we're going all the way back to about 5 days on Thursday Night Football last week, where the Buffalo Bills were playing the Miami Dolphins. And what we saw was really ugly. Tua taking off for a run, getting hit, coincidentally enough, by Damar Hamlin, a guy who was, dead on the field at one point in time a couple of years ago. So it's almost like a final destination type of thing going on in the NFL with some of these players. But all jokes aside, for Tua, this is his recorded fourth concussion. When I was going back over his playing years here, I thought it was closer to maybe 5 or 6, but officially on the record, it's been 3 concussions in the NFL, 1 in college. So this is his fourth. And I got to tell you, at some point in time, everybody's got their opinions here about what Tua should do. And ultimately, it does come down to Tua. If I can make any plea whatsoever, and I think Mike McDaniels is kind of there without saying that he believes that Tua should retire, this is the time that I think Tua needs to really think about retiring. About a year ago, a little over a year ago, if you follow me on downfieldread.com, I posted about the quarterback room of the AFC East. And one of the things that I brought up was about Tua and the concussions, and how I didn't believe that Miami was going to give him any kind of a long-term deal just because of the health issues that he has. And sadly enough, I kind of predicted that, hey, one more concussion and it could be the end of this guy's career. So while there was this hesitation of Miami, and all the Miami fans were saying, just pay him, he's putting up good stats, he's winning football games, and that's all true. But you have to take into the damaged goods effect almost that Tua brings to the table. He is an injury-prone quarterback, has been in the NFL. And I think at this point in time, people really need to start thinking about what the situation is. Tua is a human being. And I remember growing up and playing football for over 20 years, the concept of having more than 3 concussions when you're playing was kind of an anomaly. You didn't want to. The status of it was, hey, if you had a second concussion, you might want to think about not playing anymore, because that third concussion is really where you're going to start to feel the effects of it. And now this is officially his fourth at minimum. Like I said, I think it's closer to maybe his 5th or 6th, but on the record, 4 concussions for Tua. And you have to start to think of him as a human being and not just a player. I don't care if you've got him on your fantasy team. I don't care if you're a Miami Dolphins fan and you think he gives your team the best shot to win. I think Tua just needs to hang it up at this point and think about his family. There have been a lot of other athletes in sports that have gone through issues with CTE and having multiple concussions. On the very extreme side of it, you've got, professional athletes, or athletes like, I'll take it to WWE, Chris Benoit. Chris Benoit was a professional wrestler when I was growing up, and he had multiple concussions. And it got to the point where I think he ended up killing his whole family and himself. And obviously that's drastic, and that's kind of a 1 in a million type of a situation. And we never like to think about that kind of a thing. But on the realistic side, how many more concussions can a person take before it really seriously affects their way of life? Tua has a wife. Tua has kids. Tua has family members that love him, that care about him. And at the end of the day, you're playing a game. The NFL is just a sport. It's just football. Life is life. Tua has made as much money as a human being could even possibly want to make. tens of millions of dollars, and with the new contract that he's got, tens of millions of dollars more in whatever settlement that they're going to bring if he decides to retire due to injuries. That's more money than your kids are going to know what to do with, than what your grandkids are going to start to know what to do with. So from an aspect of the NFL, from the NFL's Player Association, I got to say, please implore him, if you're his doctor, checking out his scans, you really have to almost push him to make this decision. He's a competitor. He loves the game of football. Maybe he hasn't completed everything that he wanted to complete in the NFL. He hasn't had a lot of success in the playoffs. He's never made it to a Super Bowl. And obviously that's everybody's dream to make it there. But I think at this point in time, it's in the best interest of Tua. It's in the best interest of the NFL. That's just a bad look when you've got a guy going down and we start talking about fourth concussion, fifth concussion. Really got to start to implore him to not just take some time off, but maybe walk away from the game as well. I was a little taken back. I actually have Tua on one of my fantasy teams, and it obviously declared him as out as soon as the concussion had happened. And then later on, it marked him as questionable. And I kind of laughed about it, and I'm thinking, questionable for what? Questionable for retirement? Because that's the only question mark that's on the book right now for Tua. But that's the NFL as a whole. That's their decision. It's his decision. Nobody can really force you to walk away. I hope he gets all the information. Once he gets all that information, I hope he makes the decision to finally walk away from the league and go and live his life and have all the things that a normal person would want to have. Speaking of the NFL, last week, if you tuned in on Tuesday, I feel like I went really in depth with each game that happened in week one. Give you kind of the breakdown of what the highlights were, where the disappointments were, all that fun stuff. And I wanted to do that this week as well. But I got to tell you, I was really disheartened with the NFL, not just with the Tua situation, but watching games this week. And I brought up the WWE or WWF before. This is really becoming a mockery. And I don't think a lot of people are not seeing this. There are 31 different fan bases out there that actually see what's going on. If you understand football at all, if you understand the rules at all, you know that there's one team out there, and I don't even have to mention them, that's getting preferential treatment from referees in the terms of getting penalties that are called for them in dire situations, in the terms of not having penalties that should be called against them in dire situations. There's a quarterback in the league right now that has the most interceptions in the last 5 or 6 years that have been overturned by defensive pass interference. I don't have to say his name. You already know who it is. But I'm watching this game over the weekend, and all I can help to think is it's scripted. And I hate to be that guy. I hate to be this guy that's thinking that it's rigged, but it's so blatantly obvious at this point, it's hard not to see it. And going online, and I'm thinking maybe I'm crazy, right? I'm gonna take a step back and get out of my own head a little bit. You've got 31 other fan bases that are saying the same thing. You've got 31 other fan bases that are showing, hey, you know what? On this 4th and long play, the defense rushed 3 guys on the defensive line, and 2 of them were being blatantly held. How does a line judge miss that? Well, he misses it if he wants to miss it. The defensive pass interference call, that's questionable. I would say it's probably it's defensive pass interference. There's a lot of rule checkers out there like, well, if the defender is going after the ball, he has as much right as, yeah, I get it. They have a right too, but you can't knock a guy down. That being said, if you wanted to go back to the AFC Championship game last year, where they blatantly knocked down a Ravens wide receiver so that they could get an interception, that wasn't called for pass interference on the defense. It just seems that a lot of calls are going one way, and it is. It really is going that way. So the WWE has an integrity issue. The NFL has an integrity issue with being scripted at this point. When I was a kid, 10, 11, 12 years old, I loved wrestling, really did. And when you're young, you have your heroes out there. There was Hulk Hogan and the Ultimate Warrior and the Macho Man Randy Savage. You had these guys and you were thinking that wrestling was real in that aspect. Wrestling is real in the Olympics. So that was a quote in one movie. I think it was Liar Liar when they were talking about, is wrestling real? Yeah, in the Olympics it's real. On TV otherwise, no, it's not real. There's actual athletes out there. Those guys do phenomenal things. And it's the same thing with the NFL. I'm not taking anything away from the NFL players that are there. They are phenomenal athletes. They really are. To be able to go out there, they're putting their bodies on the line. Those are real injuries that are happening. It's real muscles on them. They're taking real shots out there. They are real athletes. But it's really sad to see at this point that games are being dictated by referees or bad referees. I've got a solution for you. How about we quit challenging just a few different things? Why can't we challenge penalties or ghost penalties? I've seen a lot of ghost penalties the first couple of weeks. Somebody got called for a holding penalty as his finger got caught in the other person's jersey. I saw a phantom face mask penalty where a guy didn't even touch his face mask, grabbed him by the shoulder pads and whipped him all the way around, and they called him for a face mask penalty, 15 yards. These kind of penalties are keeping drives alive, and they are dictating how the game is going. Why can't the booth upstairs call back down to the officials? Do we not have the technology to where they're wearing something in their ear at that point in time to where they can get a buzz and say, hey, you know what? You guys called that a face mask. It's not really a face mask. Hey, guess what? You guys called this a holding penalty. Wasn't a holding penalty. We have the technology. There's plenty of cameras out on the field. Why are we leaving it to 6 or 7 individuals dressed up in black and white stripes to dictate how a game goes? And now you've got 2 weeks in a row where one in particular team got their butt kicked twice. The stats show it in the games. Week 1, they got beat. You look down the stat sheet, you wonder, how did they actually win that game? Well, they got some really timely calls. Week 2, same thing again. They got beat up and down. How did they win that game? Well, they got some really timely calls. So it's time to get rid of the timely calls. Let's urge the NFL to start making a change to this stuff. I've already done that. As far as I'm concerned, I had Sunday Ticket for years. I didn't buy into it this year because, first of all, I don't really feel like $500, $600 to get every game out there is really worth it at this point if you're just going to push along teams to get into the NFL and to get into the Super Bowl. So I've not done that this year. I have not re-upped on the NFL Sunday Ticket. I've also canceled my NFL subscription as well. I've canceled anything, all my plans to go to games this year. I will not be buying any more NFL merchandise until there are actual changes that are being made. Not just to the way that the games are being played, but again, to the health of the players. They talked a lot about hip drop tackles. How many injuries did we have with hip drop tackles last year? Well, we saw something like that in the Cincinnati game, kind of a combination hip drop tackle, horse collar. I believe Joe Mixon last week got hurt on a hip drop tackle. He came back, or maybe that was just over this last weekend, hip drop tackle. They're not doing anything for hip drop tackles. And to tie those two things together, what I will say is that you're not going to see anything about hip drop tackles. I think even Justin Jefferson got hit, or maybe it was Jordan Addison with the Vikings, got injured with another hip drop tackle, no penalty called. You're not going to see that penalty called. This is my prediction. You're not going to see that penalty called until it goes against a specific team in a very specific situation. Then you will see that penalty being called. It's really unfair, and it's really unnerving to see that all of this talk about keeping players safe, the concussion protocol, and if they want to wear those caps, I think that's a great idea. That's on them. That's an option. But the NFL has to make more rules, and they have to uphold their rules that they're making in the offseason. So unfortunately for me this week, again, I was a little disheartened by what I saw over this weekend with the lack of care around the players in the NFL and the lack of really good sound judgment on referees. I think at some point in time too, you have to bring up maybe referees that are making blatant bad calls should be suspended. Maybe they should be fined. Maybe they should be fired altogether if you can't do your job correctly, if you can't make the proper calls. I don't know what job outside of being a weather person that you can have and be wrong so often and to get to keep your job. So there really has to be a lot more that's done. The NFL can do it. They really can. They just don't want to, because at this point you've got, again, one individual who's in, your T-Mobile commercials and your State Farm commercials and your Hy-Vee commercials and your Subway commercials, and he's bringing in a lot of money. Oh, and by the way, there's somebody else there in the stands that they want to focus on, and the revenue that that person has brought in with all of their fans that could give two rips about football. She's up in the stands as well, so let's give them more money there. You've got announcers like Tony Romo, who's been in that same position a few years ago when he was playing, more than a few years ago, with Jessica Simpson in the stands. So they know that it's a money-making thing. They know it's a revenue-generating thing, and therefore they're going to give special preferential treatment to these individual teams in order to boost them along into the playoffs and see what happens at that point in time. It's never been so obvious before in the first 2 weeks, but we'll see what the NFL does. But I think it's going to take a lot more voices from a lot more people to really call for a change and something to happen. And unfortunately, I think they only go by money there. So the NFL is a money-making machine. That's why they went to Brazil and played on a crappy field. That's why they're going overseas to Germany and London and all these other places. It's for money. That's it. You could have a situation where you take an NFL team or NFL teams. There are states that obviously don't have NFL teams. How fun would it be to, instead of going overseas and appeasing some kind of a fan base there, how about going to Nebraska and play a game there? How about go to Iowa and play a game there? How about going to a different state where they don't have a football team and go play a game there? New Mexico, you could go there. They don't have a football team. Go to some of these other places instead of going overseas. I'm sure the players would appreciate that as well. But like I said, the injuries, the lack of concern that seems to be out there, and the scriptedness of this first 2 weeks in the NFL has really been bad. Moving on to my next topic is going to be maybe the biggest one of the day for today is Bryce Young and the benching of Bryce Young. Moreover, they're going to start Andy Dalton at quarterback next week. Bryce Young is in his second year in the NFL, coming from Alabama. And I mention that because, let's be honest, Bryce Young was a great college football player. And you can point to that, but there's been a lot of great college football players that don't seem to make it in the NFL. Another number one pick overall that turned out to be a bust. He was a great NFL player or a great college player. How about Jamarcus Russell? Does anybody remember that name? Quarterback for the Raiders, whether they were in LA or Oakland or whatever, city that they were in at that point in time. Jamarcus Russell was another one. But you got to remember that when it comes to Bryce Young playing at Alabama, playing on a team full of guys that got drafted into the NFL, playing with Nick Saban as your head coach. Sure, he was dynamic. I don't know what people are doing promoting this, and I've said it for a year and a half now. He was not going to be the guy. Bryce Young was not going to come out, and he was not going to lead any football team to any playoffs, any championships, or anything like that. So to draft him overall number one was a huge mistake. I wasn't being mean. I get called out for this a lot. Oh, you're shedding a lot of hate. You're putting a lot of shade on guys. All you are is negative. No, I'm trying to be realistic. And now it's actually happened. So if you want to say that I'm still hating on the guy, he's played 19 games and he's 2-17, I believe. So 2-17 as a professional quarterback. There's something that obviously goes into that. You're just not very good. And the excuses that are being made for him to cushion the blow. And I do feel bad for Bryce Young. I think he was put into a situation that it wasn't a winnable situation. But then again, he probably shouldn't have been picked number one and had all that pressure put on his shoulders in the first place. So you look at that situation, I think he should have been a second round, maybe a third round draft pick. And he is showing it at that point. Am I hating him for it? No, I don't have anything against Bryce Young. I also didn't have anything against Desmond Ridder. He didn't pan out. I also didn't have anything against Zach Wilson when I said he wasn't going to make it. He didn't pan out. I also said that Mac Jones wasn't the guy. He didn't pan out. There's a lot of quarterbacks out there that just don't make it. And it seems like everybody out there wants to say, everybody picked in the first or second round, they're an all-star. They're just great. They're great. They're great. They're great. Well, there's certain tangibles that are being missed. There are great college athletes, Tim Tebow, and there are really bad NFL athletes. Again, Tim Tebow. They break records in college. They're not so good in the NFL. He's just one of them. Now, whether it's because he's had 3 head coaches in a year and 2 games, that's quite possible. Is this a new Is this a knee-jerk reaction, I should say, for new head coach in Carolina to bench him after 2 games? I don't know. You've only seen him really for 2 games. I would have given him a little. It's a shocker to me that he got pulled so quickly, but I've said it before. I didn't think he was going to make it through the whole season. I figured sometime during midseason that they were going to end up pulling him for Andy Dalton. But it comes sooner than later. So we'll see what happens. You can't say that he doesn't have weapons at this point. He's got Deontay Johnson. He's got Adam Thielen. He's got Xavier Legette. They just drafted a running back, Jonathan Brooks. I don't think Chuba Hubbard is that great, but they've got weapons there for him to be a better quarterback. And it falls on the decision-making skills. So to kind of get into the next topic of what happens with Bryce Young, what happens when a guy is picked at number 1 and he's not really a number 1 quarterback? Well, I think the Chicago Bears did a fantastic job. Whoever made the decision to trade that number 1 pick over to Carolina, maybe they saw something. Maybe they just weren't, happy with what they saw between Bryce Young. Maybe they couldn't make a decision between C.J. Stroud and Bryce Young. Who knows? Maybe that's it. Or maybe they were just giving Justin Fields another year, which is something that I think that they should have done this year as well. Now, I've said the same thing about Bryce Young for the last year and a half that I've been saying about Caleb Williams. Caleb Williams is going to end up in the same kind of a situation as Bryce Young. I'm sorry, it is. I said the same thing a year and a half ago. You can call me a hater. You can say that I'm wrong, but I'm going to die on that hill because that's what I see. Am I a professional scout? Absolutely not. But there are certain tangibles there that I've said before. I can't pick apart what exactly it is. Is it the fact that Caleb Williams didn't win a game against a ranked opponent in college? Is it that Caleb Williams couldn't get a big comeback from behind win in college? He's supposed to bring football back to Chicago. And if you listen to all the Chicago Bears fans in the preseason, this is their year. They're going to win the division. Oh my gosh, we're going to so many Super Bowls now because we got Caleb Williams. Well, my take has been they should have done the same thing as what they did last year when they traded out of that number 1 spot to not take Bryce Young. They had a great opportunity to really build for the future this year. Hypothetically, let's say they trade out of that number 1 spot again and they keep Justin Fields, who's still on his rookie contract. Oh, and by the way, Justin Fields in Pittsburgh, he's 2-0 right now. Same criticism that he's gotten over the last couple of years in Chicago. He can't lead a whole lot of offensive drives into the end zone. Sure, that's fair enough. They kicked 6 field goals and no touchdowns in week 1. Last week, they finally got into the end zone over this last weekend. No turnovers. He seems to be doing just fine under a new system. Still under a rookie contract in his 4th year. They didn't have to trade him away. They could have waited until that 5th year option to really find out what the kid was made of. And in that process, you trade away that 1st round draft pick that you took Caleb Williams with. Maybe you get some interior offensive linemen, which is what I said you should have done. You could have gotten Rome Odunze still. You could have gotten some interior offensive linemen, and you could have had a more experienced Justin Fields back there. And you really could have built for the future because the way that people were hyping up Caleb Williams, you possibly could have gotten 3 1st round draft picks from some team that was really desperate for a quarterback. You maybe could have even dug the knife into the side of Minnesota if they were going to bite. And that's a division rival. You could have grabbed them and had them trade up to number 1, give you all those 1st round draft picks, the draft equity that you could have gotten from it. But you had the golden goose, you had an opportunity, and I just feel like you blew it there. I don't think Caleb Williams is going to amount to a whole lot in his first 2 games in the NFL. He's 1-1, and he's only got 1 win. I don't put that on his shoulders. I put it squarely on the backs of every Chicago Bears defensive and special teams player because they were the ones that really brought that game back when Will Levis in Tennessee wanted to give it to him, give that game away. In part, it was a loss. It was a missed opportunity for Tennessee, but Chicago took those opportunities and they ran away with it and they got that win. But in 2 games, you're 1-1. You've got no touchdown passes. You've thrown for a total of maybe 265 yards, no touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. And watching that game this weekend, DJ Moore, I wouldn't have wanted to be in that locker room. I got to tell you, there was a point on the sideline where Caleb Williams is looking to Keenan Allen, and DJ Moore is sitting right there, didn't even want to acknowledge his existence. And you can't really blame the guy. DJ Moore is a phenomenal wide receiver. He was a top 10 wide receiver last year with Justin Fields. And this year, not the same. He doesn't even look like the same guy. And it's not because of his routes that he's running. He's being constantly underthrown. He's being constantly overthrown. He's being constantly missed. Caleb Williams isn't reading the route correctly. Something is happening here where Caleb Williams is not adapting to the NFL game style, or he's not adapting to the playbook. He doesn't understand it. Maybe it's too fast. I don't know what it is, but there's a point in time when DJ Moore was rolling on the ground on the sideline after another missed opportunity from his quarterback. Dude could not have been more pissed off. We're talking about 2 weeks, and he's already got, if you want to call it, Stephon Diggs syndrome, but he's not happy with his quarterback, and I can't say that I blame him. Chicago had a great opportunity to build something big in that division. Mark my words, this will be a mistake for the Chicago Bears. We might be seeing the same thing with Bryce Young with Caleb Williams next year. Maybe the same thing with Justin Fields, and they get rid of Caleb Williams in 3 years. It's happened before. I'm not being mean about it. It's not hate. I don't hate the kid. Just saying, not the best option coming out of the draft, and I think that they made a mistake with him. So, with all due respect, cut the hype on the Bears. They're not the real deal until he can show us that he can throw for more than 125 or 150 yards in a game. And if you remember, this was the guy that he's going to break some records there. He's going to be the first quarterback since who knows who it was, Jim McMahon, to throw for over 3,000 or 3,500 yards in a season. He's definitely not on pace for that. So let's not get too caught up in that deal. But instead of continuously bashing people, let's move on to the next topic that I want to talk about, and that's Derek Carr. I'm going to pat myself on the back again. If you've listened to any of my podcasts, any of my shows that I've gotten criticized for, I said Carr, and even when I put out my top quarterback rating, I said Derek Carr was close to being a top 10 quarterback. I didn't put him in the top 10. I think I put him somewhere 11 or 12, but the guy is playing out of his mind. Now, granted, that first week was against Carolina, and we just kind of went over Carolina and what problems that they're having. But Derek Carr has been efficient to no end. They went and beat up on the Dallas Cowboys. A lot of people aren't fans of the Dallas Cowboys, but keep in mind, Dallas went into Cleveland in week 1 and made that number 1 defense from 2023 look not so good and put Deshaun Watson in his place. So the Dallas Cowboys aren't bad. The Saints went in and tore them up, and they've scored almost 100 points in 2 weeks. So for everybody that wants to criticize Derek Carr and say that he's not the guy, he is the guy. He just maybe needed a year. I don't know what it is, but he's got the same group of characters there, right? Chris Olave, who was barely utilized in week 1. Rashid Shaheed. You've got Foster Moreau, who had a concussion. He had a great week 1 and he disappeared in week 2. Alvin Kamara is really the big playmaker there. At 29 years old, this guy looks as spry as ever, juking, spinning, scoring touchdowns. But Derek Carr is leading that team, make no mistake. I said that the New Orleans Saints were going to win that division. I said that they were going to win it easily, and they are 2-0. You've got the Atlanta Falcons, who looked really impressive last night against the Philadelphia Eagles. Outside of the first, I'll say game and a half or game and 3 quarters, I was starting to lose a little bit of hope in Kirk Cousins here. But what other quarterback do you know of that you can give the game ball to and say, here you go, kid, or he's not a kid anymore. Here you go, guy, take the football. You've got 1 minute and 35 seconds left. We need a touchdown. Oh, and by the way, you don't have any timeouts. And Kirk Cousins looked phenomenal right there. And he didn't for the first 3 quarters of the game. He wasn't that great. But in that drive, he looked really good. So 1-1, we'll see what happens with the Atlanta Falcons there. Obviously, they've got Carolina. They're 0-2. You might as well forget about them. So we're looking at the New Orleans Saints and Derek Carr. So Derek Carr, probably a top 5 guy. And here's the thing as well. If you listen to enough NFL football, if you listen to enough podcasters and enough professionals like Colin Cowherd or Nick Wright, who couldn't be more of a Ravens bashing, Chiefs loving analyst, and that's about it. He makes some of the wildest claims ever, and I think he does it just for clicks. Week 1 is a liar, right? So when we were looking at week 1, we're thinking, oh my gosh, look at week 1 here. All of the upsets you had, I won't get into it yet, but week 1 is a liar. How about week 2? I think week 2 is the actual liar this week. So for everybody out there where your fan base, if you've got an 0-2 team, looking at you Cincinnati, looking at you Baltimore, who's supposed to be a playoff contender this year, if you've got a team who's 2-0, Pittsburgh Steelers, I think it might be a little bit premature. I think it might be a little bit fake to jump on that bandwagon. Where we used to say week 1 was a liar, I think week 2 was the bigger liar out of the 2 weeks. Even if you look at the Las Vegas odds, out of those 16 games that were played over the weekend, the team who was favored to win only won 5. And if you have played in any kind of a survivor pool, if you know what that is, it's basically you pick one team, the team that you think has the biggest chance to win in that week, and you can't use that team for the remainder of the NFL season. In week 1, that was the Cincinnati Bengals. And if I'm not mistaken, it was over 40% of people who were picking that one team as the hands down absolute winner for that week. It was Cincinnati at home against New England. And we all know what happened there. They lost. Last week was Baltimore. Baltimore Ravens hosting the Las Vegas Raiders. They were somewhere above 30% as that one team who hands down, this is the team that's going to win. I think Vegas gave them the biggest odds of winning as well at maybe 8.5, and that didn't happen. So there's a lot of parity in the first 2 weeks of the NFL. There's a lot of injuries in the first 2 weeks of the NFL as well. But those are the two things. Don't get your panties in a bunch, as they say. But that's my topics for today. Just wanted to throw out a couple of things. Good luck to everyone out there. Thank you for tuning in. It's going to be a short podcast today. I wanted to keep it under a half an hour. Thank you so much. If you've got any comments, questions, concerns, go ahead, click like, follow, share, all these different kind of things. And I am looking for like-minded individuals. So I always love talking to people. If you go back and look at my podcast, I'm bringing on different guys that I've met at fantasy football, fantasy turf wars. I'll plug them again. That's a really cool thing. We're in a 64-man fantasy football tournament here. There's 4 divisions of 16 teams. I've met some really great people there. I'm going to be doing a podcast with an individual later this week, and I hope I don't butcher his name, Sean. You know what? I'm not even going to say his last name, Sean. He's a writer. He loves NFL, but I'm always looking for people that would love to be on a podcast. Maybe they don't have their own platform. Maybe they don't have their own stations. I'm looking for people that are really smart when it comes to NFL that you can bounce ideas off of. Yes, I will continue to do these one-on-one podcasts, and no comments this time. I haven't gotten any comments. I've been answering a lot of questions. People are coming up to me about, who should I start this week in fantasy football? I've got these 4 receivers, which are the best 3? And I want to say I was about 100% on giving advice on fantasy football last week. If I wasn't, I sure didn't hear from people. I didn't get any nasty grams as far as, your advice sucks and I lost my league this weekend because of you. I should have started the other guy. But feel free to hit me up. Send me a message. If you'd like to join the podcast, if you want to talk football, that's all I really do. We talk, and we're not talking. I'm not paid by anybody. I'm not paid by the NFL. I don't have my own fancy show. I have no advertisers. I really don't care. There's some shows where I've got lined up as well where we're going to maybe incorporate some adult beverages and have a whiskey night and a beer night and all that kind of stuff. And just people talking football, not even necessarily guys. I had a great lady on about a week ago, and she really knows her stuff, the Gridiron Goddess. So shout out to her as well. But follow me. I'm here on if you're watching me on X, Facebook. I've got, sometimes I post on my website yet. It's www.downfieldread.com. Feel free, or follow us on Fantasy Turf Wars, and we'll go from there. So thanks everyone for tuning in. Hope you have a great week. Stay in touch. Keep on watching that football. Thanks a lot, guys. Appreciate the time today.